My name is Keith Thompson. I am the co-founder of Focus Distribution. Uh, Focus Distribution is a company that specializes in helping asset managers share their unique stories with the financial services community. We currently represent 4 money managers and service over $3 billion in assets. Our goal is to help educate and inform you, the financial services community. To that end, I am thrilled to have the portfolio management team for Old West Investment Management with me today. Old West is based in Los Angeles, California, and as of year end, we're ranked #1 for both their 3 and 5-year performance numbers by TSN Top Guns out of almost 750 firms and over 2,600 products for their all cap and small cap opportunity solution.
When we launched our company in 2008, and even before that, my dad started in this business. He was a partner at a small boutique firm. Started at that business in 2000, but really the process for identifying new companies really starting with the management teams. And you've looked at our marketing information, but we really talk about one of the key things that we do, rather than listening to what people are saying, watching what they are doing. So whenever we look at a company, one of the first things that we do is we go to the proxy statement, and the proxy statement is going to tell us how much stock management owns and how they get paid. And it's important for us to know what metrics is that compensation tied to, and is it friendly to shareholders. So that would kind of be lesson #1, going through every single company, making sure that we're invested in companies where the top shareholders are also the management of that company, because that's going to inform every decision that they make.
You want shareholders aligned with the management teams of the companies that you own. You're one of the few firms I know that kind of leads with the proxy statement, and we just heard from Joe Jr. why that's so important for you folks, and really having what you refer to as I think smart compensation, where the success of the shareholder is aligned with the management team. So I think we've kind of covered that effectively.
It's just kind of funny, really quick, when you present our process to people in the outside world that run companies, they totally get it. It doesn't make so much sense to people that buy and sell stocks all day, but when you present it to a business person, they totally understand it and get it.
Hey, look, when you look at this overall philosophy, I think it's one of those common sense things that most managers just don't do. And when you realize the way it's manifested itself in the outsized performance that you have, it's surprising that they don't. But knowing that people understand what the philosophy is like now, maybe we can cover a little bit of an outlook, namely some of the opportunities that are out there. We kind of build this as an entree into FANG 2.0. I think almost every consultant is familiar with FANG, which is Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, and Google. But FANG 2.0 is the concept that the next decade might be dominated by things like fuel, energy, aerospace/defense, agriculture, nuclear renewables, and gold/metals. I'm hoping we can start with the D in FANG, the gold and metals. In your latest quarterly report, you discussed the ballooning national debt, not just in China, or not just in domestically, but in China, Japan, and pretty much every country over Europe. Does that inform some of your exposure to gold, or are there other factors that have been going into that?
Well, it's definitely a big argument to own gold. The world is just awash in debt. It's not just a phenomena here in the U.S. I mean, we're over indebted. China, Japan, all of Europe, the debt levels around the world have never been seen before like this. And so what you're going to get, you're just going to get a continued debasement of currency and money printing, and so that's what gives us comfort in gold. It serves as a hedge. Really, I say that the reasons to own cryptocurrencies and gold are similar, except for that all of a sudden there were 5,000 cryptocurrencies and there's still only one gold. It's defensive, it's a hedge in the portfolio, and and we go to bed at night feeling really good about it.
Obviously, gold is not your only metal exposure. As a matter of fact, I saw a recent interview that you provided, and you talked about the kind of lack of investment in global supply of metals like tin and copper, and you described that as a generational opportunity. Can you and I think Brian probably would play into this also, share your insights and into why that is, and maybe an example of how the portfolio is exposed?
Yeah, I'll just start that with by saying it's from what I've seen, and I'm old enough to say this. I see it as a once in a lifetime opportunity. The move to renewables, the move to a carbon-free environment, the move to EVs. It doesn't appear to be a fad. It appears to have staying power. So everybody wants to drive a Tesla, but no one stops to think about where the 200 pounds of copper come from in every Tesla. Yeah, the demand is just going to steadily increase, and the supply is not there. Richard Atkerson, who runs Freeport-McMoRan, said that if they came across a deposit where they were sure it was full of copper, he said 10 to 15 years minimum to get any copper out of the ground, and in that time, the demand for copper worldwide is going to double. In that time, the supply is not there. The only result is higher prices. But Brian, I'll hand it off to you. You expand on that.
Yeah, I think that's a really good overview. I mean, it's just at the heart, it's a fundamental mismatch between supply and demand. All of these technologies that are being proposed to deal with global warming, climate change, decarbonization, whatever you want to call it, we just follow the money. The Western governments, and not just the West, but the East as well, are throwing hundreds of billions of dollars trying to reduce emissions, transition away from fossil fuels into other forms, cleaner forms of electricity generation, all of that. It all translates into a much higher demand for metals. And the supply of metals is inadequate. And there's not enough money being invested into increasing new supply. And the problem is, as Joe mentioned, is you can't just flip a switch. It really takes 5 or 10 years plus, assuming you've already found the metal that you want to develop. And so there's been a serious lack of investment in the industry. We just see a slow motion train wreck happening here in the metal space. And, we're not just broadly buying commodities to invest in it. We are, kind of going across each individual commodity, looking at the forecasted supply and demand, trying to find areas where the shortages are the most acute, or where it's more difficult to bring on new supply, or where demand isn't as sensitive to prices, so that when prices do start to rise, like we believe will happen, you don't see demand destruction like you see in other commodities. And so that has led us to some pretty off the beaten path type of areas. Uranium, tin are some of the lesser followed ones. We're pretty big in copper as well. So, I think that, and we can go into each individual one as you would like, but really the overall view there is that this shift to clean energy is creating a huge increase in demand for metals that we don't think will be easily met.
But once again, we don't own the commodities. It's all about the company. And so if we see the opportunity in that space, I mean, then you go back to our process of looking for companies run by owner managers with huge investment stakes themselves, strong balance sheets. They're not going to run out of cash, and so it just goes back to following our process.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is that these companies are trading at extremely cheap valuations. I mean, normally you'd see an area of the market that had this strong of fundamentals, you'd think that they would be trading at a premium, but it's the exact opposite. I think so much of the investment world is enamored with the other FANG stocks, the AI stocks, the Magnificent Seven, whatever you want to call them. Everyone's crowded into one corner of the market, and so these types of areas with attractive fundamentals seem to be ignored. And we think that's an interesting combination where you have extremely strong fundamental outlook and a very cheap starting valuation.
To that end, you own a company called Alphamin. I think tin is probably one of the least sexy metals I've ever heard about. But it isn't just about the fact that it is this specific metal. It is in fact about the management team. It is about the fundamentals. It's about the actual assets that they have in the ground. Can you give some specifics on that, Nate?
Sure. So just for those that aren't familiar, tin is, it's not the can metal that most people think of it as. I mean, the biggest use for tin now is in solder for electronic devices. So it's the electronic glue, if you will, that holds all the components together in every circuit board. And so it's a essential part of every electronic device, and flows into all of the themes that we just mentioned. I mean, whether it's renewable energy or EVs or AI, automation, all of these future big secular growth areas all require increasing amounts of electronic devices, more sensors, and all of that. It all really creates a big demand for tin, but the supply situation is extremely fragile. It's very concentrated. China and Indonesia are half the market. Both are struggling to keep up production. It's just a really interesting case where you have rising demand on one side and supply that is struggling to stay flat, let alone grow to meet the increasing demand. We own a company called Alphamin, which is one of the few companies that is increasing the supply of tin. It's unique in that it's the highest grade mine in the world. I mean, it's multiples higher grade than the next highest competitor. And what that means is it translates into very low cost. And so they're able to pull the tin out of the ground extremely cheaply. It gives them a competitive advantage. It gives them great margins, even when the tin price fluctuates. They're sort of the last man standing in terms of ability to continue to produce in a volatile commodity price environment. It's you look at the valuation, it's extremely cheap. You look at in terms of our process, the insiders, one of the founding groups that put up the financing, still owns a majority of the stock. They're long-term shareholders. The CEO came from there. There's a lot of alignment of interests in terms of the company wanting, or the shareholders wanting to see this company do well, grow. I think it's one of these situations where they're generating cash, faster than they really know what to do with. And so pays a nice dividend yield. I mean, it really ticks a lot of boxes for what we look for. And not to mention that it trades at a single digit, earnings multiple.
In single digits, that's a stock that doesn't even trade at $1 per share. And I think when a lot of consultants look at that, it gets their radar up. Why is that not an issue?
Well, the share price really is it's immaterial. It's irrelevant. All that tells you is how many pieces the pie is chopped into. And so what really matters is how large the company is. It's a $1 billion company. They produce 4% of the world's tin. That'll be probably 7% of the world's tin a few months from now as they bring on a second mine. And so, we liken it to the old Yogi Berra joke about, do you want your pizza cut into 4 pieces or 8 pieces? There really isn't a difference. There's lots of things companies can do. They could consolidate their shares, and divide the number outstanding by 10, and then the price goes up by tenfold. So it's really more of a cosmetic thing. It does cause some issues. We have talked to the company about doing that because there is that natural response to seeing a low price stock. But really, all that matters to us is what is the total value of the company, and what is the earnings potential, because those are the two ratios, or the two numbers that you want to see. If the total value of a company is $1 billion and they have 1 billion shares outstanding, well, each share is going to be worth $1. If there's 10 billion shares, they're worth 10 cents. If there's 100 million, it's worth $10. And so really, however many shares the company has outstanding is something that can be adjusted by the management on a whim. And so, for companies that are looking to, put on some sort of cosmetic adjustments to make them more palatable to, general retail investors that aren't that familiar with that dynamic. Sure, it's something that can be done, but for people like us that are only focused on the value proposition, we don't really care how many pieces the pie is sliced into.
So to hit on some of the other FANG letters, real briefly on this one though, on the nuclear, you've been in the uranium space for a while. Does that basically have the same dynamics to gold? Is it a supply issue and production issue?
Not so much to gold, but it is similar to tin and copper and some of these other base metals that are consumed. Actually, uranium was the thing that got us really opened our eyes to this broader theme of critical minerals and the clean energy transition really driving demand for a lot of these metals. We've been in uranium now for almost 7 years. And really, it was one of the, I mean, at the core, it was the same idea. It was demand increasing and supply not able to keep up, and the price being so low that there was no incentive for people to produce more. And so our view was that if there really was more supply that was needed, the price would have to rise in order to give an incentive for new production. And we saw that take place over the last several years as the prices of the commodity has more than doubled since we've become involved with it. And you've seen a lot of the companies that produce it or that have development projects have increased in value along with that. We think there's still a long way to go there. Nuclear power is seeing increasing interest around the world as governments look to figure out ways to reduce emissions, especially in electricity generation, which is one of the big carbon emitters. And so you're finally starting to see the world wake up to the importance of nuclear power, that it's a 24/7 source of base load power that doesn't really produce any emissions compared to coal or natural gas, which are the other two big sources.
Our time is moving along quickly here. We've only got 7 minutes to go, and there's some issues I want to talk about. So speaking of the agriculture, the A in FANG, you own a company called Bunge. I think it's a name that most people aren't aware of. Can you talk about how that kind of fits all the things that you look at, specifically the management team, management being aligned, and maybe some of these longer term trends in terms of the need for generating food?
Yeah, this is Joe. I'll take that. It's funny how you come across new ideas, but that was our screening of Form 4 filings on insider activity, and I saw that the CEO of Bunge did a $10 million purchase of stock and looked into it, and I saw he was brand new. So I thought, well, that had to be a stock grant. There's no way that a new CEO wrote a check for $10 million. I called the company. It took 3 phone calls to get a call back, and finally I asked the question. I assume that's a stock grant, and they said, well, you're half right. He was given a $10 million grant, but he also wrote a check for $10 million buying the stock, and that opened my eyes. I dug in deeper. Greg Heckman, longtime ConAgra executive, came to Bunge, mismanaged stock for years and years and years. He saw a great opportunity in turning the company around. First thing he did is he asked, why are we in New York? Moved the company to St. Louis, right in the middle of America's breadbasket, and has just transformed the company beautifully. The ag industry, not in terms of growing crops, but in terms of distributing wheat, corn, soy, all the oils all over the world, is controlled by 4 companies: Archer Daniel Midland, Bunge, Cargill, and Dreyfus. 2 are private, 2 are public. ADM and Bunge are the public ones. But it's just a tremendous opportunity going forward as the world becomes wealthier. When you go into Africa and China and India, as their diets improve and they need more of these items to improve their health and their lifestyle. Stock is extremely cheap. And it pays a nice dividend yield, selling at 9 times earnings. And I think that as we watch him continue to do deals, it's really just like a work of art, what he's doing and transforming the company. And we think it'll be a hold for a long, long time. Love the fact that there's only 4 companies that control this flow of product worldwide.
We've only got a few minutes left, but there's probably one of my last questions going to hit on a couple things. One of which we just spoke about, which was owning companies that have lower share prices. You owned a company called Enphase. That was a very low share price when you bought it, no longer the case. But after you kind of answer this question, I'm going to ask you one about another one that you currently own, Enovix. But can you walk a little bit through the Enphase story, and where you bought it? Did it work out right away, and where is it now?
Yeah, I can take it.
Brian, hang on. It's kind of a joint venture between Brian and I, because Brian was following the stock and had identified it, and all of a sudden I see T.J. Rogers come in and make a huge purchase of stock, and Brian wasn't aware of who he was, and I said, this is the guy that ran Cypress Semiconductor for his entire career, and came in and made a huge acquisition of stock, and now we dive into it full force, and Brian, take it from there.
Yeah, this was a stock. I mean, I was familiar with it back from 2012 when they did their IPO roadshow. I'd followed it for a while. They were high flying up into 2013, 2014. Got to close to $1 billion market cap, but then with the crash in oil prices in 14 and 15, you saw a lot of the solar names get hit. They're less attractive to switch to renewable energies when oil prices are very cheap. And so when we started looking at it again, maybe around I want to say late 16, early 2017, it had fallen from 800 million to, I think it was sub 100 million. People thought they were going bankrupt. It was a really difficult situation. But as Joe mentioned, they had a couple guys come in and write some big checks. They brought in a new management team. The issue with that stock was the product was popular, but they weren't able to manufacture it well, and they were losing money. And so, the interesting thing was they brought in this manufacturing talent from some much, much larger companies to try and produce this popular product at a profit, and laid out a roadmap. But you're exactly right. I mean, it was maybe $1 when we started looking at it. It dropped, I think, all the way to 60 cents. But they put in the plan in place. We actually wrote about it in our one of our letters in 2017. I think it was around $1 a share. Not quite sure what it's at today. I think it's around $180 a share. So well up over 300 times the low when we were purchasing it. I just think that goes to show you that really the share price is secondary. What's important is the value of the entire company, the progress of that value, and what you can pay, for that in terms of total value. So, it was one of our better investments. I mean, maybe one of our best equity investments that we've had. We still own some shares, but that experience really led us to, take a serious look at another company that that individual was a big part of, and that's Joe can talk about.
Yeah, we're running out of time here, so if we can make this quick.
Yeah. Company's Enovix, headquartered in Fremont, California. And once again, T.J. Rogers, a legendary Cypress Semiconductor CEO, has invested $300 million in the company. And basically for lithium-ion batteries, they replaced graphite with silicone, and the battery's running much cooler, a much quicker charging time. And this is all the way from watches to EVs and this battery technology. They say that they're 5 years ahead of their competition in this area, and we think there's a good chance that he's going to have a similar success that he had at Enphase with Enovix.
I think the point here with Old West is that these are a lot of names that maybe people haven't heard of, certainly an underallocated area. And Joe, maybe you can make a last comment as it relates to, I think, the valuations of small value relative to maybe the Magnificent Seven. I think that the disparity between large and small hasn't been as large as this for over 20 years. Is that correct?
Well, that's true. And then the other thing that's true is the disparity between the commodity index and the stock market index. And that delta has never been greater in history than right now. Commodities versus stocks, huge delta right there. So I think two ways to if you look at the next 5 to 10 years, one opportunity would be in smaller companies. The other one would be in companies that are producing these essential commodities to get to a carbon-free environment.
Let me just quickly add that we've seen a lot of opportunities in the small cap space, just because there aren't as many people looking there. I think most of the big large cap companies have lots of analyst coverage. There's thousands of eyeballs looking at these things. I mean, you go through our portfolio, there's probably a few names that you've never seen before. I think that's one of the reasons that we find these opportunities where the price is much different than what we view as intrinsic value.
Oh, look, I can't thank you all enough for joining us today. Obviously, I think it's an interesting space. It's an under-allocated space for many people. Anybody on the call here today, if you'd like to follow up, please do so. We're more than happy to set up a secondary call here if you think it's a meaningful way for you to allocate to this space for your clients. Brian, Joe Sr., Joe Jr., thank you all for joining us. If you have any questions, please send us an email or give us a call. So thank you all very much. You have a wonderful day, and we appreciate you taking the time.